Hello and welcome to this Hymo Setups lap guide for the Nürburgring 24 hours here in the BMW CS Racing. So, I'm going to take you through a few things to help you get a better lap time in this class for the weekend's 24-hour race, and yeah, hopefully we can find you some time. So, you join me at the start-finish line to this 26-kilometer circuit. We're going to go through sort of what you need to do in order to get the best lap time possible in this M2 and some of the tips and tricks that I personally have from driving this car and producing this data pack. So, obviously, we start the lap and we just accelerate down to turn 1. Like any other car, it goes in a straight line fairly well. Braking point for turn 1 I find to be kind of 150 just after. So you see that I start to pick up the brake kind of as that 150 board, for me on my FOV, bear in mind this changes, disappears. Now, the slow build-up I do is not required. It's just a legacy of my driving style from driving the Porsche Cup a lot. But something that I find that is kind of required is this car has ABS, right? So you can press the pedal as much as possible. You're never going to lock up, right? And there's no variability to that ABS setting. And that's where the problem lies for me, in my opinion. It's quite intrusive. And if you're like massively into ABS, it's really quite hard to turn. So I find that it doesn't really help braking performance. So I tend to threshold brake kind of on the edge of ABS. There's not like I believe there's no tire temperature reason for that. I just find the car reacts a lot better when you're not at 100% brake. It's got a bit more front to it. And generally, this is what I prefer to do and what I prefer to do while driving this car. An important thing to note about this car, straight off the bat, you know, if you've just started driving it, if you've drove it for a while, you might think, oh, this car has quite a lot of understeer. You know, it's quite front limited. I've tried loads of setups. I'm always front limited by this car. And although that has some truth, it's actually a lot down to the steering rack. The steering rack itself is one of the tightest steering racks on any car. It's 360 degrees. So turning a little bit, you know, it makes a huge turn in the wheels that you might normally be used to, especially if you drive something like Porsche Cup or even GT3. It's got a tighter steering rack than that. GT4, again, all these cars, when you're turning, 45 degrees, you're turning the wheels less than you are in this car. And that makes it very, very easy to like over push the front axle and like understeer your way through the corner. So, important to note that minimal steering is really required, and it's really important never to like over push the fronts. So that's something you need to keep in mind. I personally drive this car around here, and what I believe to be faster. Now, it's touch and go whether it is 100% faster, and I'd definitely say for the race, especially if you're not too experienced, I wouldn't do this. I run it with TC off. You can set that traction control toggle in the options section. So if you go to controls, you can see if you scroll down, it's never colored in for whatever reason, but it works. Traction control toggle, you can see I've got it to a button, right? So traction control toggle, you just click it and you turn traction control completely off. That still allows you to keep ABS because obviously the car has these like settings like DSC and like full TC setting and then like completely off, and that tends to change the ABS as well. Similar things happen with like the Porsche Cayman GT4. Again, a car that you can toggle the TC off, but you can't do that through its normal settings, 1 through 11. I find that faster. Now, it definitely creates more of a problem of being how hard it is to drive. You have to be much more careful on the throttle. This car has not a lot of traction, especially for how low power it is, I guess you could say. I mean, it's very fast around here, actually. But the traction's not great. And I'll talk about that in the second corner. So as we come down to turn 1, open it up onto the curb, pitch the car in. I found personally, though, you can cut loads of this, but this car, you can't change the damping. And I find that generally, when it hits a bump, it tends to pogo a bit. So I personally preferred to just like skirt around the edge of this curb, but in GT3s, you're like cutting this curb completely, in GT4 completely as well. In a car that can take the bump a little bit better, you're pretty much aiming for that bollard. But that's how I found to do it. Turn the car across, and yeah, I mean, you can see how close I get here. It's really, really important to, I may even touch, maybe that's the dirt, but it's important to like sacrifice this corner and try and get off as straight as possible. You see that as soon as I come off the corner and do my majority of the turning, I really open that steering up to allow those rear tires to be focused as much on traction instead of turning. So it gives me the maximum amount of traction, and that just helps me, it stops me from sliding, because it is quite easy to slide this car. And something I want to pay attention to is if you see me leaning forwards, because I can't see the UI. When you shift second to third in any corner, see how look, little kick there. It always kicks you, so you have to be really straight when you're shifting second to third if you have TC off. Generally, I'd advise to do that with TC on, because obviously the reason why this happens is because the rear tires lose traction. If you've got TC on, it's going to intervene. So if you want to avoid TC and avoid losing speed out the corner, again, the same applies, whether you have TC on or off. Heading down to the next corner. This is a corner which is always, you know, you see people go in really hot and keep it tight for the next corner. Or you see people really compromise this left and widen themselves up for the straight. Common logic would suggest that going slow through this corner, widening it out, and having the ability to have a better run down to the hairpin, because it's a fairly long straight, would be faster. But just with the camber of the corner, and you kind of see it here on the horizon, it's much faster just to not compromise that much. Brake down into this corner here, and then hook this curb. This curb gives you a bit of a rotation, reduces a little bit of the grip on the right side front tyres, and that just naturally rotates the car a little bit more, allowing you to carry some higher corner speed and generally get off the corner better. In terms of a braking point, I'm pretty much the end of the curb here. Just brake, and again, do what I say. And this corner as well, kind of as you get to this grass, just a little bit beforehand. You'll see in cockpit, you know, pretty much as the hood cowling comes up, just get onto the brakes. Yep, and feed the car through. I like to keep it in fourth. Just helps to not unsettle the car. Go down to third, keep it tight, and then straight. You know, as soon as I've kind of got the car turned and slowed through the corner, I'm thinking, right, let's straighten this out to minimize any rear slip. You know, you can use as much of this as you want. Just try not to dip in the gravel because it will slow you down. Down towards the hairpin, a little bit of a double apex corner. I like to open up across the grass here, so you can see that you've got this extra bit of runoff on the outside. Open up across a little bit of grass. You're then widening the corner out as much as possible, and you can brake down into this corner. Very heavily banked corner. It doesn't look too banked in sim. Believe me, it's very banked in real life, and it is still banked. It's just the simulator just the elevation and cambers differently. It definitely makes them look less. Again, staying out of ABS for me personally, I'm kind of treating it a little bit as a double apex. You know, not massively, not like I'm going massively wide out, but you can see apex 1, out a bit wider, get onto the power, apex 2, and again, straightening those steering up when we're on full power and just using the maximum of that exit, just trying to maintain as much traction as possible. We do this corner in third gear as well, which just helps us maintain reasonable traction. You could probably do it in second, but you're going to have much more problems, and you'll see a lot throughout the lap. I tend to just use one gear higher than maybe would be optimal for the power band. Schumacher S's. Onto this curb. Again, maximize track usage. Off it, drops off pretty nicely. Jump up on that curb, helps rotate the car a little bit. You'll need a small lift. Maybe with loads and loads of practice, if you get this perfect, you can do it flat, but it's pretty hard to do. I do run a little bit of the gravel on the outside, but not too much. Don't get an off track. And again, just using all the track as I can. You know, something, again, to note, minimally steering, especially through something like this section, just trying to guide the car as gently as possible throughout the course. Here, braking about 150. I mean, this says 100, then you get 100 there, so, you know, that's a bit of a myth. I'd say just after that 100 board disappears from your FOV. Again, can change. Disappears. Get onto the brakes. Super easy to run into this corner, far too hot. It's really easy just to go really fast in, and you think you gain, but you don't. Much better to go in at like a sort of a medium sort of pace. get this inside curb, and then cut it back across. You know, it looks like I kind of going pretty hot there, but trust me, you can go in a lot faster. You can probably carry in 9k more, but you're not gonna go any faster than that. Compromise, again, minimal braking here. Get to the curb. I find getting to the curb really helps. Using that power to rotate the car throughout the corner. Important to note, you know, like, you got to think a little bit about weight transfer. Onto the front, you know, you're braking, weight goes forward. You come off the pedal and get onto the throttle. Okay, weight's going back, but you're also reducing the total amount of rear grip, which naturally increases the rotation a little bit, which is what allows me to go through this corner. And you can see I get a little slide, but it just helps me rotate. And as long as we're not overheating that tyre too much, it's beneficial. So, down towards the kind of latter stages of the GP loop. Super easy. I'll just make this note now. Super easy to get stuck here if you're doing training via active reset or just training in general. Super easy to get massively caught up on like how much time you can gain in the GP loop. It's really evident that when you do like even high end like Nordschleife competitions, NLS, you know, whatever, right? It's super obvious that people do the second half of the lap less than they do the first half of the lap. And I think that's important to keep in mind. You know, when training, try and complete as many laps as possible. Try and do the latter half of the lap as much as possible, because even if it's to the point of setting up an active reset to do the latter half of the lap, it's beneficial because you go there less, just naturally by training in this sort of way, and especially with active reset that we've got over the last few years. Even just a shortcut, you know, you know, maybe not everybody's aware, but you can go even in like a test drive server here, like if we go to the final corner of the GP, that right hand hairpin that we don't take on this layout, if you just go there, go to the cones, hold the reset button, you'll reset to the end of the dotting there. So you can kind of shortcut your way into doing a hot lap. Super important to train the latter half of the lap. And I just thought I'd make that statement because it's super important to actually understand that and action that, because it'll just make you faster. Into this fast chicane, again, maximum track usage. I don't like getting into ABS. Braking point's about 75. If you touch this like significantly, you're going to get an off track. So you're aiming just to skirt around the edge of that. As you can see, I'm pretty good on the limits here. So the off track's a lot easier to get, I find, in the left-hander than it is in the right-hander. You know, you can often go through a section like this where you can get an off track on the left and the right and go, not sure where I got it. Usually, most of the time, it's turning in too early here. And then the right, you can cut a lot, you know, even more than that, right across the inside. And setting the car up for the start of the Nordschleife. If I just go to chase, I can show you kind of how much I'm cutting here. As you can see, a lot more than the previous corner. Pulling the car across to the inside, gently braking. This is an uphill section. The car can often over-rotate on entry if you push it in too hard, so important not to like carry miles and miles of speed into the apex. Keep it nice and tight. And, you know, as we get to the crest, you know, think about it. You know, as we come up and the car lifts over the crest, the car is effectively lighter. Therefore, you have less grip. Therefore, the car is quite likely to slide. So again, trying to keep the wheels straight. We're trying to be, you know, open this wheel up as you get over this crest. As you can see, I do have a little bit of a kick of oversteer there. Just something you need to keep in mind. I like to keep it tight here, but just, you know, as you get to this crest, make sure you lift. Make sure you either do a little lift or actually straighten the steering up. You know, this is something that when you have TC on, you're going to get quite a bit of intervention, and it's going to slow you down quite a lot. First corner, Sabine Schmidt's curve, I believe. Again, always you'll see everyone do this who's got, you know, a good amount of experience on the Nordschleife. You know, you get to the end of the barrier, you open up into the sort of the old pit lane. Do that just to open up the corner, and then, you know, use the camber to your advantage, trail the car in, get nice and close to the apex, get onto the power. You can, a lot of these corners on the Nordschleife, I don't do it here, you've got like this curb that's really steep, right? And these are massive curbs, and if you hit them with a lot of force, it sends you flying. But you can almost use them to like carry a little bit more exit speed. So if I was to run up against this curb here and just run up a little bit onto it, it just provides that resistance, and it just allows me to carry that a little bit more speed. And there'll be points of this lap where I do that. But you know, around here it's hard to get a perfect lap, so there's definitely mistakes in this lap, and I'll probably highlight them when I get to them. There's one that I know of that's not perfect, and I wouldn't advise to do it exactly like that. Here, I think it's small lift, yep. So a little lift on entry, always quicker to power through a corner than it is to go in too fast and lift on the exit. So, you know, you're coming off massively on the exit, it's going to cost you a lot of speed. Whereas if you lift early and just make sure, you know, I go in a little bit on the brake there, but it's not necessary. Little bit of a lift. Get it nicely towards this curb. Important, again, to use the camber. The car bounces a little bit. Run up all the way onto this little exit curb. If you run like this, sort of this wide here, a little bit longer, you will get an off track by this like little grass section here. So just be aware of that. Down into the first real section of the Nordschleife. Here, open up as much as possible. Kind of, I find it super easy to go in too hot here, but also super easy to go really hard on the brakes and massively over like commit the front end grip of the car. You know, you want to keep quite a lot of available grip for turning, so you can't use it all for braking. You know, of course, you're always managing that in a race car or in any car when you're pushing it to the limit. You know, you've only got so much grip to do everything. So, you know, you've got to manage your overall grip to turn, your overall grip to brake, and, you know, you just got to keep that in mind. So braking quite lightly, just getting nicely into the camber here, and again, some camber here. Power through here. You can see I keep it in fourth. The reason I do that is just to maintain a little bit more traction. It would be slightly faster, slightly quicker acceleration in third, but for me it's not worth it. Here you can jump a little bit of the grass, not loads because you'll get an off track, but this just helps to open up the next corner. Car takes it fairly well. You know, you can see if I show you in cockpit, you know, you're not really taking a lot, but you know, it's just aiming the car a little bit to cut this corner. Same for here as well. Again, you can cut too much. You know, you'll see everyone do this in any car really. Just cutting this inside. Be careful not to get like more than half a car over the inside edge of this steep curb. Then you'll get an off track. So this is fairly close, but not quite. Again, I find, you know, when you've took this curb, nice and light on the brakes. Don't over ask the tires of anything, because if you know, you can brake at 60% here, but when you go over that crest again, after it's kind of bouncing a little bit, if you're asking too much of the braking, the tires are going to kind of get really close to that 100% level of grip of what it can provide, and then you might step over that as you're asking to turn in. You'll have a slide and a snap, and it's really easy to get out of shape here with that sort of curb usage. You know, extremely minimal braking. You know, I'm using maybe 20% maximum, so just be aware of that. Roll it in through the corner, keeping the like getting into the camber as much as possible. That's the same for most tracks here. Again, using the outside curb. Next section, shift down to third. Finally, we're going to use third gear. Down to third. Get a wheel up on the inside of this. Helps to rotate the car massively as well. Think of it, right? So when you're on these big curbs, the car pitch is like, you know, you're pitching the car left and right, and it just naturally, when you've got that front right up in the air, you're pushing more weight onto that rear left, which just generally gives you a little bit more rotation and slip. That's kind of from what, you know, this kind of changing sort of the corner weighting slash how the weight of the car is being applied to the road surface. So that'll give you a little bit of rotation. You know, you see a lot of cars, you go over the edge of this grass because it's quite smooth. Here I prefer to miss it. I find it always reacts badly, pretty much in this M2. And instead I just kind of use the edge of this curb to get a nice smooth run. Down in towards, I think this is Hotlaps, but I'm not sure, so don't tell me off if I'm wrong. Maybe it tells me, or is it Hatzenbach? I have no idea what that says. No worries. Anyway, right, into here. This car, you'll notice, compared to any class of car in this race, it takes this car the slowest. We've just got no downforce. We've got a lot of top speed, but no downforce. Again, braking just after the crest, after the car's kind of settled on the bounce. So you can see here, braking 20-30%, nudging the car in, and then, you know, once we get to, you know, pretty much the apex, just past the apex, committing heavily to the throttle, helps to shift the balance, just helps you to rotate through the corner. Again, now down this straight, I just like to keep to the left-hand side as much as possible, just minimizing the distance towards the next corner. This is a corner I get wrong. It's not perfect. It's not terrible, but it's not perfect by any means. Here, through this left, you know, you're a bit off camber. You're reaching a crest. The car's going to naturally push right once you crest here, as you can see happens. You know, you know, my trajectory at this point would be to keep nice and close. But what I don't do is turn early enough. And ideally, you want to skim a little bit of grass here, maybe going a little bit slower, and keep it nice and tight to the left. As you can see, I missed out a little bit. I'm out wide. In this case, you know, you just pull the car back across as much as you can, which is what I do. You know, I'm not being able to use the track as best as possible, but you know, it's a recovery of sorts. Not too much of a time loss, but you know, keep that in mind for your own laps. Through here, right? So this corner, super important. Keep nice and tight to the curb. Whether you're coming off from this side, nice and tight to the curb. You know, not touching it, not like bouncing on it. A lot of the time in this circuit comes from just being comfortable to place the car from curb to curb and not hitting it, because I'm sure, you know, if you've done many laps around here, or if you've done any laps around here, you know, you're going to hit one of these curbs wrong and it's going to hugely upset the car and you're probably going to have a crash. So again, just keeping it nice and tight to this curb, getting on the power nice and early, because there's a lot of camber here. You know, you kind of see it here, but this corner is so cambered. So you can get on the power nice and early, use the camber on the inside, maximizing the angle that you have in order to get the camber. And yeah, exiting out, you can use this curb to kind of have a little bit more exit speed, because it's going to do what I was talking about earlier in the lap. Jump up on there. Just be careful not to hit it too fast, because if you do, suspension's going to compress, you're going to rebound quite heavily, and it might push you out into that left wall. So just be aware of that. Down this hill, this section in real life is so steep, and you just don't notice it in the sim. Again, just carrying like the shortest distance through here. Come up to the sort of the valley of this section, just nice and close to the left, and then using all that entry curb. In real life now, you can't take this curb. It's huge. In the sim, we still have a model that was scanned in 2016. So it's not so much of an issue. Keeping it in 5th gear, taking a nice bit of curb, you know, again, lightly braking over it. I'm trying to keep as much available grip to the landing of this curb, you know, because I'm aware that when it lands, we're going to peak those tires a little bit harder, and that's just going to make it harder for me to control. And again, when we get more straight, then I apply, you know, a much larger braking force. Keeping it nice and tight to the right-hand side, powering through. You know, you treat this as almost like an apex here, and then you go out to sort of the middle of the circuit. Never worth it to go all the way to the outside. I'll show it from cockpit, from chase. Pulling it in, starting to power through. Again, using a high gear. You see there, that's sort of the thing you'll gain with many hours of confidence, and I've not done it perfectly here, and if I was aiming to do the race in this car, I'd want to make sure I wasn't doing this, but you see I just grazed that curb a little bit, so you just want to get as close as possible without touching it. That little touch is slowing me down a little bit. Okay, so again, powering through, you can power through a bit earlier here, again using that outside curb to kind of carry that little bit more speed and stop your trajectory towards the outside of the circuit. Through into this fast left, you want to kind of lightly brake quite early. You'll see the car actually kicks quite a lot for me on this run. Again, because of a small crest here, you know, a lot of these corners are designed with a lot of camber. So you see that, you know, as I come from the outside of the circuit into the camber, small crest, so just be aware of that. Light brake, light throttle application. Don't over carry speed through this section. You see I have to have a small lift on the exit because I'm a little fast. Every car but the GT3 car around here, it's so easy just to go in far too hard here and just ruin your exit. Even though it's not a big straight or anything, it's just so much slower. So braking nice and early here. As you come off the end of this sort of like extended concrete section to stop people from spinning directly on grass, nice and early on the brakes, nice and close to this curb, and powering early and powering through this section here. And it's super important to do that. I'm going to play it in cockpit view for you. So here you go, through here, nice and early on the brakes, not too fast in, down to third, power through. Again, another section, you know, we're at the 8th kilometre now of the Nordschleife, braking kind of just after this sign, see that? Again, massively cambered, really important to get into the apex here and not on the outside. Again, treating it as a double apex. First bit, widen it out, second bit, nice and early on the power. You can use the curb to sort of protect. You can see here actually, great point again, you know, I've talked about this a lot. I'm aware I've said it a lot, but a little bit of a slide kind of gets corrected by the curb. And it's almost adding artificial camber to the edge of the circuit with how steep a lot of these curbs are, and you can just use them to your advantage. So just be aware of that. This section used to be famous for giving a lot of damage to every class. It's quite good if what you do here is that you almost aim for this bit of the curb because it flattens off the dip a lot more. Light lift of the throttle in fourth gear through here. Get onto this little curb a little bit, just lessens the dip, the crest. Here's miss, hit, miss. I do hit, miss here on this car. Again, you know, you don't really need to get this first apex. Again, it's a lot about the second. You can see that I kind of misjudged the entry a little bit. Again, you know, like we talk about everywhere, maximize track usage on the outside. Maximize the usage of the camber. A lot of the tricks of the Nordschleife is all about this. Nice and close through here, powering through and past the apex to manipulate the balance of the car, just to neutralize it up a little bit. Into this section, again, another corner, super easy to brake too late and go really, really deep into and just ruin your exit. It's not worth it. Nice and early. I don't really have a braking reference here. I just kind of have a feeling because there isn't really anything to show. I mean, the best thing I can say is like some of these trees, but I think the trees can even change between graphic settings. Maybe you can use the sign on the right as it kind of disappears, but it's not really that good of a reference. You know, it's still a little bit away. Nice and light onto the brakes. Again, maximizing your braking power, so how much you're braking when you're in a straight line. So okay, maximized here, turning in, I'm gonna reduce that a little bit to allow myself to have more grip for this section where I need to rotate the car. Back straight again, big on the brakes. Down into third I use here. A lot of cars it's second. Sometimes you even use first in like the Porsche Cup just to get the rotation. Can pull second here if you really want to. I'd recommend third. Sort of a double apex, so you get that first little dip section here. Go out a little bit wider. Third, power on. Again, super important to keep flat on the exit. You see that my car gets quite loose here. Again, as we come around the exit, we're just asking a lot at a low speed from the car. Good job, Will. Can't see the cameras. And again, you know, it's a little bit of a kind of a crest again from coming out of the camber. Get that a lot around here, like I've already talked about. You can use all this concrete on the exit, and then there you go. You're through. You're into, I think this is Adenau. I think this is like the bridge over Adenau. I'm probably wrong, and someone's going to criticize me. Cockpit here. Again, I find super easy to just go too fast into here, get out into the outside wall, get far too wide. I like to brake nice and early. I literally use the toilet as a reference to brake. So pretty much as this toilet's starting to disappear, brake. Nice and early on the brakes, keep it nice and tight. I don't find the use, at least in this car, of going out this wide. Much prefer it to keep quite tight up to this section, setting the car up. You know, you can use this for the next corner. You know, you want to pull it nice, close to the left here. You can use this curb to just artificially increase the track boundaries again a little bit. Car can take it just fine. Every car can pretty much here. Turn it in, power through, and again, trying to straighten the car up. You see, I get a bit loose there. You know, I'm having a bit of a hard time of it. But again, you know, just trying to keep straight as you start to get out this crest. Not the best from me, but it does the job. Going towards like the back straight section, I find this to be one of the trickiest corners on the circuit. I just find it so difficult. Again, not really a good braking reference. That's one of the hard things about the Nordschleife. You can do maybe this sign disappearing here on the right hand side. Presume it's there on everyone's screens, but I can't be sure of that, so yep, just be aware of that. You know, a lot of the braking here I find is on feeling. You get good references here and there, but there isn't a good reference for every corner, so you have to do quite a bit of it on feeling. Brake nice and early, out wide. You want a late apex here. There's no point going in early. You can see kind of, if you kind of look here, it's a little bit of camber here. It's not too extreme, and it's much more extreme this section. You know, you see the slope of the circuit ramp down a lot more. You need to be in for this apex. You'll find a lot of the time in many cars, you'll go, oh, I've missed the apex here, but it's not too bad. I mean, here you see I get it quite well, but sometimes you might be half a car off this, and as long as you're still using this sort of really cambered section, you're going to be getting a reasonable exit. You know, important again to get to power early. Use minimal braking on entry, on the entry phase when you're turning the car. You can, yeah, this is something I did in some of my laps. Careful here in this car if you're running TC off. If you get up on the outside curb here and then drop off, like as you're still turning the car through the corner, because you've still got a bit of a corner here, easy to just like completely lose the rear. I've done it on a few occasions, not the best. Down the straight, no tricks here with gears or anything. You just flat out keep it to the left hand side, minimize your distance, how I find it best. Again, up here, minimizing the distance, don't worry about the crest. Again, minimizing the amount of steering, distance. The reason I go out a little bit wider here is just because you want to just minimize the scrubbing. So I let the car drift out. Smooth line through here, then keep it to the right. Up the hill, you know, very, very steep hill in real life. 12 kilometers done. I shift to 6th. I tried 5th and 6th. They're both about the same. Some cars you'd find it's much easier to keep 5th, for example, sorry, or the lower gear, and you gain lots of time. Here it's so marginal between the two, you can do either. I'd probably just say use 6th. Again, massive. This is a Bravery Corner. I can't remember the German name. Use the, you know, you can skim the grass a little bit entry here, just to make sure you're maximizing the entry that you use using this concrete. Light bit of braking. I love to, how I find it's easier in this car, I think the absolute fastest way with a lot of practice is 5th and just carrying the speed through and committing as aggressively as possible. But here I find that, you know, you can use 4th. You see, I use 4th, I'm dropping down to quite a high gear, high RPM, sorry. And I'm using it to almost limit my speed a little bit, you know, because I've reduced the power, so limits my speed a little bit on the exit there, flat out. Super easy here. I mean, I can kind of show it, I think. You can kind of see it there. You can see the crest there and the kind of off-camber nature of this exit. It makes it really easy just to think you're fine, go in too hard, and then end up really needing help on the exit and dipping your wheel in the grass. So just be aware of that. You can use that little bit of concrete that they put to stop you from dying instantly. Just be aware of that. Here again, maximize entry, you know, pin it through here. I have a small comfort list because I am a terrible racing driver. But yeah, I mean, again, you're kind of, you know, you're over a crest, so the car's going to do the same thing it was doing at like the second sector of the Nordschleife, you know, where I said I made that mistake earlier in the lap before the long hairpin. Again, you kind of have to turn in a little bit earlier than expected. Same in all cars. Car's going to push massively wide. As you do that, you see car doesn't really take its natural trajectory. Here, in terms of braking point, it's just before the curb. A little bit. Most cars, it's the curb here, just before the curb. Porsche Cup, it's a little bit further back because the car's just got no braking performance. And then, like I say, nicely on the brakes there early. Important to keep tight here. Again, sort of a double apex. Get that first little bit, keep it nice and tight. Straighten the wheel up for the exit. Maximum amount of traction. You can run up a little bit onto this curb if you like. Best carousel. So, best carousel. Super, super easy. If you're struggling with going into these carousels and like getting thrown out of them, it's because you're going in too tight. That's what I usually find. It's not 100%. Sometimes you're just going in too fast. But I find, going in a bit later, not allowing myself to kind of get done by this crest here and then wash up into it, dropping straight into the camber, so entering a bit later, massively helps. So you see that I go in quite late, quite high, drop into the camber, bang, only carrying brake sort of all the way through, and as I go over the crest, releasing that a little bit, kind of keeping, half throttle, a little bit of brake at the same time. You're just trying to balance the car. So you've got kind of a wheel on the bottom edge here and a wheel on the high edge, and if you feel the car's pushing up a little bit like I did there, you're coming off the throttle, and then, once you've got it back in check, you can throttle for the exit, and you're sort of anticipating kind of going up over the edge here on the exit, so you can throttle earlier and allow it to do that. I'll show that a little bit from chase cam if you'd like to have the reference. Again, like I say, dropping in quite late, keeping the car middle of the track. Over the exit, important to really straighten the wheel here because the car's going to jump and that's going to reduce your traction. If you're on TC off, it likes to kick, so nice straight wheel helps a lot. And then you're through into sort of the ladder section of this lap. This section coming up is a lot of people's favourite sector of this track. A lot of people are bad through here, to be honest, in terms of their ability through this section, but also the next sections of this latter half of the lap. Again, I say it's important to train this section. I'm worse at this section than like the Nordschleifer specialist. I remember training for DNLS, the first DNLS race of the 24-25 season. And we used to get to this section. I keep up, get to this section, and you're like, wow, these guys that specialize in this track, they're so fast here. It's a big focus point for me personally. Down to fourth, you can commit a lot of power a lot more earlier. Here's a little bit slow for me. Again, you're struggling with the fact that tires don't have loads of grip in this car, and you're having to be quite careful on how much you steer it. But in maybe a GT3 and a Cup, maybe you can power a lot more through this corner. It's very uphill, so any form of off throttle is going to slow you down quite a lot. Even when I've got, I'm off the brake there, and I'm on half throttle, just under, I'm still losing speed as I turn through the corner. So just be aware of that. Again, a section you can push a lot harder when you get more practice using the cambers nicely through. Don't touch the curbs. Super easy to go too hard on the exit here. Bump up this curb and into the wall. I've seen many people do it. Just be careful. Try and just bump up onto the curb gently. And then I like to brake lightly and turn in early. So kind of as soon as I flatten myself out on this curb, brake nice and early. Brake really lightly. You see, I use barely any brake as I drop off the curb. Just turn it in nice and early. High gear using fourth. Powering through the corner. Maybe if you're carrying a little bit more speed, you can use this exit curb again to kind of act as like an added camber to the outside of the corner. And that allows you to carry a little bit more speed. You see some people jump up across this curb. Just be careful. It's easy to take too much and die. This section here, sort of lightly through. Again, you've got the crest and a bit of camber. That's 2 times speed, William. So crest and a little bit of camber, turning in like sort of, I use this as a reference, but I can't really explain why. I use it as a reference to just start the turning phase, kind of as that is, a little bit away from the roll cage. Into the camber. Important not to over push this section. Nicely up onto this curb. Power through this exit here. You want to make sure you carry as much speed through the ladder section. And again, like we spoke about before, do it in chase. Like we spoke about before, using these exit curbs as sort of added camber to the outside of the track. Often you'll see people run on the grass here. It'll kick up. You'll see quite a lot of dirt be deposited on the outside here, because people are, kicking up a little bit of dirt on that section. You can run up just onto it. Here, important to turn in early again, be straight for the exit. You know, again, it's another crest section. Nice and early, power through, straight on the crest. Super important to widen this corner out. You know, it's so easy to go in at like a medium sort of mid angle here, and not get the full benefits of the camber through here. But you know, you can open up the track right to the outside, trail it in nice and lightly, and just use that camber again, nice and close to the curbs. You know, not massively swinging it out, not massively overcommitting a lot of speed or a lot of steering angle. Into YouTube section that's always on those auto addiction videos. Again, braking as much as possible while we're in the straight line, and then juicing it. You know, trailing. Little period of coasting there. Again, pulling it as close to the inside curb as possible. You know, you get an off track here if half of your car is over the edge of this white curb, so just be aware of that. That's the reference I have at least for it. So just, you know, it's just one of those bits you can get an off track, especially if you're in a qualifying lap, which this one is. Into YouTube corner, open up the exit as much, the entry as much as possible. I like to keep it in fourth on entry just to stabilize the car and then go down to third. Again, you know, I've said this so much now. There's so many corners on this track. I think like 170. Use the camber to your advantage. Nice exit, get a straight exit in this car and run nicely up towards this outside curb. You can run a little bit wider. Advise not going too much, too crazy, because then you're going to struggle to get the car over nicely for this next section. Again, another one, turning in a little bit earlier than expected, straightening up the exit and jumping over this curve. Again, important to kind of go in a little bit slower and get a nice exit as you go onto a bit of a straight. Again, minimizing distance through here. Towards the jump, important not to full throttle this jump and end up rolling in that gravel, as someone recently did online. Get towards the jump, brake beforehand. Again, off the brake as you crest this. Let it jump a little bit. Back onto the brake a little bit heavier. Again, using as much track as possible. Down. Not too critical to hit that apex. Would be ideal if you could. But you know, really important to hit this one and be on full throttle as early as possible. Again, this massively carries throughout the next section. Similar to those few corners before, you're almost aiming for the curb. The faster you're going in a car like a GT3, the more it's going to push wide. You see, I do get a little bit of curb there. I'm a little bit early turning, but you do have to account for the fact that it's going to crest, and obviously you see, because I'm turning, the back end gets loose. Be aware of that, just be careful. Here, same sort of thing. I like to keep hit this jump or this crest quite close to the left hand side. I find it produces the smallest jump. This section in this car is so difficult. I find that the car just doesn't quite have enough grip to deal with its speed through here. You'll see I lift a small amount. You can just about do it flat, but it's so sketchy through here, so I recommend practicing this section quite a lot. There's no real trick to it. You know, opening up the corner as much as possible. You've not got much camber here. The corner's quite flat. Keeping as close to these curbs as possible. You want to avoid bumping up onto this curb, bottoming the car out, spinning, crashing, race over. You know, just threading the needle through this section and into the final few corners. Here, again, you can carry loads of speed through this corner. I don't think it's necessary. Roll gently, a little bit of speed in. You know, extend the braking period a little bit more. Again, I like the higher gear for entry, 5th to 4th. Keep it quite, you know, close to the middle of the sort of the track. So I get a nice little compromise to the left-hander. Again, down another gear. Straightening up the exit, using that curb, not running into the gravel, not going too crazy. Second carousel, super easy to fall out of it, fall out mid, fall out late, have a moment. I find just getting as close to the curb as possible, using as much camber as possible is the best for it. So again, making sure that you're in the camber at the steepest point. So, you know, don't go in too early. You know, if you go in here, you're going to push up on the outside and fall out. So enter a little bit late. You know, as your turning point, sort of choose the end of the curb. is what I'd say, just as that curb starts to fall away. Nicely in, power on as we get to the middle. Again, exit, you know, you're going to get loose. So straighten up the car as much as you possibly. You see that I purposely straighten up the wheel quite aggressively here. But to minimise that kick of oversteer, I still get a little bit. Again here, final corner of this section, of pretty much of almost a lap. You can use this curb on entry, you can do it in any car. Just opens up the corner a little bit more. I find this corner is like, you carry loads in, you get right close to the exit here up on the outside, and then you shoot for an imaginary kind of target. I actually tend to kind of find it to be this sort of crest here. You kind of aim for that. You lift a little bit, and you want to just skim this grass and like narrowly avoid this curb. It's so important for maximum speed onto the straight, Göttingen. And as you can see, I do that pretty well actually on this lap. So, you know, just noting that, you know, you want to be aiming for that crest of grass, getting a little bit of grass on your left wheel, but you want to be away from the grass and away from the inside as the curb comes, because you don't want to hit that and, you know, crash. Literally, that's what'll happen. Onto the straight. You want to make sure you're flat on the exit. You don't want to be lifting on the exit here. It massively compromises your run. And then I just keep it to the left-hand side, minimizing distance. I don't know of or have any solution to like slightly better bumps or anything, but it doesn't really matter on a car like this. Maybe something like a GTP, but we're not driving that round here, especially in the 24 hours. It's down straight where the tourist layout starts. Again, keeping the minimum distance. Tight through this left-hander just to minimize a little bit of distance and out to the outside. Final section here again. Quite easy to make a mistake if you're not careful. Open up the track, sort of straight line this as much as possible. Light braking, just kind of roll the car through. I personally find that it's just important not to over push the section and hit the curbs as well. You know, if you hit this curb, you're in that wall, and then your race is done. Braking massively in a straight line, using this sort of opening up for the access road to open up the last corner as much as possible. This bump's going to give you a big kick of you know, weight on the nose, so you'll hit ABS quite heavily. I mean, here you even see like, the car just doesn't react very well on its dampers. Like I fully lock up there, like very unstable. So do not be afraid to take a slightly wider route through there. So just trim that white line, so you can kind of just go around the outside of this white line and not get that massive bump. Yeah, as long as you keep it straight, it's fairly okay. Jump up onto the curb. I get a little bit of a poor exit there, slightly. I'm just a little bit fast in, kind of from that legacy of that jump. Use the curb, power through the exit again, close to the curbs, not touching, and power towards the line. Not a perfect lap, but certainly a fairly decent one. This was on qualifying fuel for the Nürburgring 24 hours. If you would like the setup that I used in this lap, I have TC on, TC off versions and a safer version. You can look at the link in the description. Hymo setups. We produce setups for a lot of your favorite road cars and sometimes even ovals too. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lap guide. Feel free to comment and ask me any questions. Quite a long one, I'm aware. Oh dear, it really is a long one. I've just looked at the time and there's not much to cut out. But I hope it's informative and it helps you complete this race better in this quite fun to drive car.